Qur'an chapter 73, Surah Al-Muzzammil by Sayyid Qutb. Translation by Muhammad Al-Amrani. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. O you who are enwrapped in a mantle, rise in the night, save for a little half of it, or diminish a little from that, or add to it, and recite the Qur'an with measured recitation. Verily, we shall cast upon you a weighty word. Indeed, the rising at night is most potent in subduing the soul, and more upright in speech. For by day you have extended duties to attend, and remember the name of your Sustainer, and devote yourself to him with complete devotion. Sustainer of the East and the West, there is no deity but he, so take him as your sole guardian, and bear with patience what they say, and part from them with gracious detachment. Leave me to deal with the deniers, those who bask in their wealth, and give them a brief respite. Indeed, we have in store for them fetters and a blazing fire, food that chokes and a painful torment on the day when the earth and mountains shall quake, and the mountains shall become heaps of sand, crumbling away. Indeed, we have sent to you a messenger, a witness over you, just as we sent to Pharaoh a messenger. But Pharaoh defied the messenger, so we seized him with a crushing grip. How then will you guard yourselves if you disbelieve, on a day that shall turn children's hair grey? The heavens will be rent asunder by it. His promise is ever fulfilled. Indeed, this is but a reminder. So let whoever wills take a path toward his Sustainer. Your Sustainer knows that you rise less than 2/3 of the night, or half or a third of it, as do a group of those with you. God measures the night and the day. He knows you cannot calculate it precisely, so he has relented toward you. Recite then what is easy for you from the Qur'an. He knows there will be among you those who are ill, and others travelling through the land seeking God's bounty, and others who fight in the way of God. So recite what is easy, establish prayer, give charity, and lend to God a goodly loan. Whatever good you send forth for yourselves, you will find it with God, better and greater in reward. And seek forgiveness from God. Truly God is forgiving, merciful. It is narrated that the reason for the revelation of this chapter is tied to an incident where Quraysh gathered in their council to plot against the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the message he brought. When news of this reached him, he was filled with sorrow, wrapped himself in his cloak, and lay down, burdened by grief. Then Gabriel came to him with the first portion of this chapter. O you who are enwrapped, rise in the night, and the remaining portion of the chapter from Your Sustainer knows that you rise was delayed for a full year. During that time the Prophet and a group of his companions would stand in prayer until their feet swelled, and then the second portion was revealed, offering relief after 12 months. Another account is linked to the revelation of Surah Al-Muzzammil, which we will explore in due course. The essence of it is that prior to the revelation, the Prophet would retreat to the cave of Hira for 3 years, seeking purification and devotion, spending 1 month each year during Ramadan in seclusion. The cave, about 2 miles from Mecca, served as his place of solitude, where he would spend time in worship, contemplating the universe around him, and pondering the weak and misguided beliefs of his people. Though he found no clear path before him, nor a definitive course, this retreat was part of God's plan to prepare him for the monumental task that lay ahead. In this solitude, the Prophet found peace from the distractions of worldly life. He would immerse himself in the vast signs of creation, his spirit soaring with the beauty and perfection of existence, training himself to engage with the ultimate truth, understanding it deeply. Any soul destined to transform human existence must pass through moments of isolation, away from the preoccupations and clamour of life, to connect with the higher truths that shape the course of history. There must be a time for reflection and deep contemplation, for engaging with the vast universe and its boundless truths. Immersion in the realities of life makes the soul grow accustomed to them, content with their limitations, and so it no longer seeks to change them. But to withdraw from this reality for a period, to detach from its confines, and to live in complete freedom from the constraints of mundane existence and trivial concerns, this is what prepares a great spirit to perceive what is greater. It allows the soul to realize its completeness, independent of human conventions, drawing strength from a source beyond the common norms of society. Thus, it was by divine design that God prepared Muhammad, peace be upon him, long before he was entrusted with the great mission of altering the course of history and changing the face of the earth. For 3 years, God ordained for him this seclusion, this retreat, where for a month at a time he could live in communion with the free spirit of existence, contemplating the mysteries beyond creation, until the moment came when he would be ready to engage with the unseen, when God willed it. And when that moment came, when the Almighty in his infinite mercy decreed to bestow his grace upon the people of the earth, Gabriel descended upon the prophet, peace be upon him, while he was in the cave of Hira. The messenger of God recounted his experience, as narrated by Ibn Ishaq through Wahb ibn Kaysan from Ubayd. Gabriel came to me while I was asleep, bearing a piece of brocade with writing upon it. He said, "Read." I replied, "What shall I read?" In some versions, "I am not of those who read." He pressed me so hard that I thought it was death, then released me and said, "Read." I replied, "What shall I read?" He pressed me again until I thought it was death. Then he released me and said, "Read." I replied, "What shall I read?" He pressed me yet again until I thought it was death, then released me and said, "Read." I asked, "What shall I read?" saying this only to prevent him from returning and doing the same to me. He said, "Read in the name of your sustainer who created man from a clot. Read, and your sustainer is most generous who taught by the pen, taught man what he knew not." I recited it. Then Gabriel left and I awoke as if a book had been inscribed in my heart. I rose and went outside, and as I reached the middle of the mountain, I heard a voice from the heavens calling, "O Muhammad, you are the messenger of God, and I am Gabriel." I looked up and saw Gabriel in the form of a man, standing on the horizon with his feet planted firmly in the sky, repeating, "O Muhammad, you are the messenger of God, and I am Gabriel." I stood gazing at him, unable to move forward or retreat. I turned my face to every side of the sky, but wherever I looked, I saw him in that same position. I stood there until Khadija sent her servants in search of me. They reached the heights of Mecca and returned, while I remained in that spot. Then Gabriel departed, and I returned home. I went to Khadija and sat down beside her, leaning against her. She asked, "Oh, Abul Qasim, where were you? By God, I sent for you, and they went all over Mecca searching for you, and now they've come back." I told her what I had seen, and she said, "Rejoice, O son of my uncle, and stand firm. By the one in whose hand is Khadija's soul, I hope you are the prophet of this nation." Then for a time revelation ceased to come to the prophet, peace be upon him, until he found himself on the mountain once more. There he saw Gabriel again, and a trembling overcame him until he collapsed to the ground. He rushed to his family, shivering, and said, "Cover me, wrap me up." They did so, and he continued to shake with fear until Gabriel called to him, "O you who are wrapped in a mantle," or "O you who are enveloped," and God knows best which it was. Whether it was the first account of revelation or this second one, from that moment the prophet, peace be upon him, knew that sleep was no longer for him. A heavy task lay ahead, a long struggle, for now it was a time of wakefulness, toil and effort. From that call onward he would no longer rest. He was commanded, "Rise," and he rose. He remained standing for over 20 years thereafter, never resting, never ceasing, never living for himself or his family. He stood, and he remained steadfast in his mission, bearing the immense burden of the divine trust, the weight of all humanity, the responsibility of the faith, and the continuous struggle in countless arenas. He carried the burden of striving in the depths of the human conscience, which was steeped in the delusions of Jahiliyyah and its distorted beliefs, weighed down by worldly desires and distractions, shackled by earthly temptations. When he freed the hearts of his companions from the weight of Jahiliyyah and worldly attachments, he then faced another battle in another field, successive struggles against the enemies of God's message, those intent on crushing this pure sprout before it could grow, spread its roots into the soil, and extend its branches to shade broader spaces. And just as he finished the battles within the Arabian Peninsula, the Roman Empire was already preparing to strike against this new nation on its northern borders. Amidst all of this, the first battle, the battle of the soul, was far from over. It is an eternal struggle, with Satan as its relentless instigator, never ceasing in his efforts to wage war in the depths of the human conscience. And Muhammad, peace be upon him, stood firm in the service of God's call, ever engaged in the unceasing struggle across its many fronts. In the midst of hardship and the world turning toward him amidst toil and exhaustion, the believers around him found peace and security in his presence. Yet he endured constant fatigue, unwavering patience, and a beautiful perseverance through it all. He stood in prayer during the night, in worship of his sustainer, reciting his Qur'an and devoting himself fully as he was commanded when the voice called to him, "O you wrapped in your mantle, rise in the night except for a little, half of it, or reduce it slightly, or add to it, and recite the Qur'an in measured tones. We shall cast upon you a weighty word. The hours of the night are more intense and more conducive to reflection, while during the day you have extended occupations. Remember the name of your sustainer and devote yourself completely to him. He is the sustainer of the East and the West. There is no deity but he, so take him as your sole guardian, and be patient with what they say, and distance yourself from them with a gracious distancing." Thus Muhammad, peace be upon him, rose, and thus he lived in this unceasing, relentless struggle for over 20 years. Never did one concern distract him from another throughout this period. From the moment he heard that majestic celestial call and received its awe-inspiring command, "May God reward him on behalf of all humanity with the finest of rewards." The first portion of the surah flows with a rhythmic unity, almost bound by a single end sound, an elongated, solemn and majestic lam. It carries a dignified cadence, in harmony with the gravity of the command and the seriousness of the task, as well as the terrifying scenes that follow. It speaks of the weighty word, of the dreadful warnings, "Leave me alone with those who deny, who live in luxury, and give them a brief respite. Surely we have shackles and a blazing fire and food that chokes and a painful torment." It evokes the overwhelming moment when the earth and mountains will tremble, and the mountains will become like shifting sands. How will you guard yourselves if you disbelieve against a day that will make children's hair turn grey, when the heavens will be rent asunder? That promise will surely be fulfilled. As for the final, longer verse representing the second half of the surah, it was revealed a year after the initial command to stand in prayer at night, by which time the feet of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and some of his companions had become swollen. God had been preparing them for what awaited them, and so this easing of the burden was revealed, along with reassurance that it was God's choice for them, in accordance with his knowledge and wisdom regarding their struggles and responsibilities. This verse has its own unique rhythm, long, flowing with a sense of calm and stability. Its cadence ends with the soft and tranquil sound of mim, preceded by the extended vowel ya, as it concludes with most forgiving, most merciful. In both parts, the surah presents a vivid page from the history of this divine mission. It begins with the noble celestial call and the great command, depicting the preparation and training through nightly prayers, recitation of the Qur'an, humble devotion, reliance solely on God, patient endurance of harm, and gracious distancing from the deniers, leaving them to the Almighty, the Omnipotent, who is both the owner of this mission and the commander in the ongoing battle. And it concludes with a gentle touch of mercy and ease, directing towards acts of devotion and good deeds with a hint of God's boundless mercy and forgiveness. Indeed, God is most forgiving, most merciful. This surah, in its two halves, represents a chapter of that noble, glorious effort exerted by a chosen group of humanity that was lost, so that it may return to its sustainer. They bore patiently the harm inflicted upon them, striving within the souls of humankind, stripped of every worldly attraction, unmoved by the pleasures that distract others, free from the comforts of rest and the indulgence of sleep enjoyed by those who remain idle. Now, let us turn to the surah itself, in its beautiful Quranic text. O you who are wrapped in your mantle, rise in the night except for a little, half of it, or reduce it slightly, or add to it, and recite the Qur'an in measured tones. We shall cast upon you a weighty word. The hours of the night are more intense and more conducive to reflection, while during the day you have extended occupations. Remember the name of your sustainer and devote yourself completely to him. He is the sustainer of the east and the west. There is no deity but he, so take him as your sole guardian. O you who are wrapped in your mantle, rise. It is the call of the heavens, the voice of the Almighty and Most High. Rise, rise for the great task that awaits you, for the heavy burden prepared for you. Rise for the effort, the toil, the striving and the exhaustion. Rise, for the time of rest has passed. Rise and prepare yourself for this mission, and be ready. Indeed, it is a tremendous and awe-inspiring word that snatched him, peace be upon him, from the warmth of his bed, from the quiet of his home, and the embrace of love, to cast him into the depths of life's tempestuous storms, into the fierce winds and crashing waves, into the pull and push within the souls of men and the reality of existence. The one who lives only for himself may indeed live in ease, but he lives small and dies small. As for the one who carries the great burden of a higher mission, what need has he for sleep? What need has he for rest? What claim does he have upon the warmth of his bed, the serenity of life, or the comfort of repose? The messenger of God, peace be upon him, knew the truth of the matter, and he understood its weight. Thus he said to Khadija, "May God be pleased with her," when she urged him to find comfort in rest and sleep. "The time for sleep has passed, O Khadija." Indeed, the time for sleep had ended, and from that moment onward there was nothing but wakefulness, toil, and the long, arduous struggle ahead. O you wrapped in your mantle, rise in the night except for a little, half of it, or subtract from it a little, or add to it, and recite the Qur'an in a measured tone. This was the divine preparation for the great mission, using the means of God's infallible training. The night vigil. Most of the night, more than half, but less than two-thirds, was to be spent in standing for prayer and reciting the Qur'an, extending its sound in a beautiful, deliberate tone, with neither excessive ornamentation nor exaggerated intonation. It is reported that the Prophet's night prayers, peace be upon him, did not exceed 11 units, yet he would spend nearly two-thirds of the night in these prayers, reciting the Qur'an in a slow, measured way. Imam Ahmad narrates in his Musnad from Sayyid ibn Hisham, who asked Ibn Abbas about the Prophet's witr prayer. Ibn Abbas said, "Shall I not tell you who among the people knows best about the witr of the Messenger of God, peace be upon him?" When he agreed, Ibn Abbas replied, "Go to Aisha and ask her, then come back and inform me of her answer." When Sa'id asked Aisha, may God be pleased with her, she said, "Do you not read the Qur'an?" He answered, "Indeed I do." She said, "Then the character of the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, was the Qur'an." Then she continued, explaining his night prayer. God made the night vigil obligatory in the beginning of this surah, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions stood for prayer until their feet swelled. God held back its conclusion in the heavens for 12 months, then sent down an easing at the end of this surah, making the night prayer voluntary after it had been an obligation. She then described how he prayed, often standing long into the night, before concluding with witr, saying, "O my son, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, grew older and his body became heavier, he reduced his witr to 7 units and followed it with 2 units of prayer while seated." This was all in preparation for the weighty word that God would reveal to him. "We shall cast upon you a weighty word." It is this Qur'an and all that it entails of responsibility. Though the Qur'an is light in its composition, facilitated for remembrance, it is weighty in the balance of truth, weighty in its impact upon the heart. Had we sent down this Qur'an upon a mountain, you would have seen it humbled, breaking apart out of awe for God. Yet God revealed it upon a heart stronger than any mountain to receive it. To absorb this flood of light and knowledge, to grasp its depth, is a heavy task, requiring prolonged preparation. To engage with the grand abstract truths of the universe is heavy, demanding extensive readiness. To connect with the higher realms, with the essence of existence and the souls of living and non-living beings, as the prophet, peace be upon him, was prepared to do, is a task so weighty that it calls for long preparation. To walk steadfastly upon this path without hesitation or doubt, without turning to the distractions and temptations that pull one off course, is a burden that demands deep readiness. Standing in the night while others sleep, disconnecting from the trivialities of daily life, immersing oneself in the presence of God, receiving his light, finding companionship in solitude with him, reciting the Qur'an while the universe is still as though it descends from the highest heavens, reverberating through the fabric of existence, all of this serves as provision for bearing the weighty word, for enduring the heavy burden, the arduous struggle that awaited the messenger, peace be upon him, and awaits those who carry his message in every generation. It illuminates the heart along this difficult path, protecting it from the whispers of Satan and keeping it from being lost in the darkness that surrounds this radiant way. Indeed, the rising of the night is more intense in impact and more upright in word. The rising of the night refers to the time after the evening has settled. The verse declares that the night vigil is more intense in impact, heavier upon the body, more arduous to endure, and more upright in word, steadier in devotion and deeper in meaning, as Mujahid said. For to overcome the call of sleep and the allure of rest after a day's toil is a greater challenge for the body. Yet it is a testament to the soul's dominance, a response to God's invitation, and a preference for intimacy with him. Thus, it is more upright in word because remembrance in these quiet hours carries a unique sweetness, prayer finds a profound humility, and intimate supplication becomes translucent in its sincerity. It pours into the heart a peace, clarity, and light that may not be found in the prayers and remembrances of the day. And God, who created this heart, knows its hidden chambers, its strings, and what most deeply touches it and moves it. He knows which times find the heart most open and receptive, and which circumstances best affect its state. God, exalted is he, prepares his servant and messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, to receive the weighty word and to bear the tremendous burden. He chose for him the night vigil, for the rising of the night is more intense in impact and more upright in word. And because in the day there are distractions and responsibilities that consume much of one's energy and attention. For indeed, during the day, you have lengthy occupations. So let the day pass in its busy toils and activities, but let the night be dedicated to the Sustainer, standing in prayer and remembrance, and mention the name of your Sustainer and devote yourself to him with complete devotion. To mention God's name is not merely the repetition of his noble name on the lips, counting it on a string of 100 or 1,000 beads. Rather, it is the heart, present and attentive, joining the tongue in remembrance. It is, in essence, the act of prayer itself, reciting the Qur'an within it. And to devote oneself is to cut off completely from all that is besides God, directing oneself wholly to him in worship and remembrance, free from every distraction and every fleeting thought, standing before him with the fullness of one's senses and emotions. And having mentioned this total devotion, this severance from all that is other than God, he follows it with the reminder that there is none but God to whom one may turn. Sustainer of the East and the West, there is no deity but he, so take him as your sole disposer of affairs. He is the sustainer of every direction, the sustainer of both the East and the West. He is the one and only, the sole deity. There is no other besides him. Thus, to turn toward him is to turn toward the only truth in existence, and to rely upon him is to rely upon the only source of power in existence. Trusting God alone is the natural fruit of belief in his oneness, his sovereignty over the East and the West, which is to say, over all the universe. The messenger who is called to rise and take on the weighty burden is in need first and foremost of complete devotion to God and dependence upon Him alone. From this devotion he will draw strength and provision for the heavy burden that lies upon the long path ahead. Then God directs his messenger to beautiful patience in the face of what he will encounter from his people, their accusations, their rejection, their turning away, and their obstruction. He is told to leave them be and give them a little respite, for God has in store for them a punishment and a reckoning. Bear with patience what they say, and part from them with a gracious departure. And leave me alone with the deniers, the ones endowed with wealth and ease, and give them respite for a little while. Verily with us are shackles and a blazing fire, and food that chokes and a painful torment, on the day when the earth and the mountains shall tremble, and the mountains shall become as heaps of shifting sand. Indeed, we have sent to you a messenger, a witness over you, just as we sent a messenger to Pharaoh. But Pharaoh disobeyed the messenger, so we seized him with a crushing grip. Then how will you protect yourselves, if you disbelieve, against a day that will turn children grey-haired? The heavens will be rent asunder by it, his promise will be fulfilled. If the first narration is correct, revealing the early verses of this surah at the beginning of the prophethood, then this second part must have been revealed later, after the public declaration of the message, when the deniers began to oppose and torment the messenger, peace be upon him, and the believers. But if the second narration is true, then the first part of the surah must have been revealed in response to the harm and obstruction the prophet endured from the disbelievers. In any case, we find here a command for patience, following the earlier command to rise for prayer and remembrance. These two, patience and remembrance, are often coupled as they fortify the heart for the arduous journey of this message, whether that path be through the inner struggles of the soul or the outer struggle against those who oppose the call. Both paths are fraught with difficulty. Bear with patience what they say, the insults and provocations, and part from them with a gracious departure, without reproach, without anger, without hostility or conflict. This was the method of the message in Mecca, especially in its early days. It was simply a calm address to the hearts and consciences, a clear proclamation, a radiant declaration. To part with grace amid denial and mockery requires patience, fortified by remembrance. Patience is God's counsel to every messenger of His again and again, and to His believing servants. None can carry the burden of this message without patience as their provision and defense, without patience as their shelter and shield. It is a struggle against the desires and wayward inclinations of the self, its weaknesses, its distractions, its haste, and its despair. It is also a struggle against the enemies of the message, their plots, their schemes, and their harms. And it is a struggle against the general hearts of humanity, which often seek to evade the responsibilities of this message, slipping away in various disguises, unwilling to comply with its demands. For the one who calls others to this path there is no provision but patience and remembrance, which is the companion of patience in nearly every instance. Bear with patience what they say, and part from them with a gracious departure, and leave me alone with the deniers. I am sufficient to deal with them. And leave me alone with the deniers, the ones endowed with wealth and ease, and give them respite for a little while. These are the words of the Almighty, the Subduer, the All-Powerful, the Unshakable. Leave me alone with the deniers. These deniers are mere mortals, while the one who threatens them is he who brought them into existence with a single word, be, and they were. Leave me alone with the deniers. This is my call, not yours. Your task is only to convey the message. Let them deny and part from them graciously. I will take care of their fate. You need not burden yourself with thoughts of the deniers any longer. It is a crushing, shattering moment when the Almighty isolates himself with these feeble, insignificant beings, these deniers, however powerful they seem on earth among their fellow creatures, and give them respite for a little while. Even if they were to live out the whole of this worldly life, it would be but a little while. For in God's reckoning, this life is but a day or part of a day. And in their own reckoning on the day of judgment, they will perceive it as no more than a fleeting moment of daylight. It is little, no matter how long it seems to last. Even if they escape the punishment of this life, the retribution of the Almighty will still come, for he grants only brief respite before seizing them with relentless vengeance. Verily, with us are shackles and a blazing fire and food that chokes and a painful torment. The shackles are chains, and the blazing fire and the choking food that tears at their throats and the painful torment, all of these are fitting recompense for those endowed with ease, who neither respected the blessings they were given nor showed gratitude to the one who bestowed them. So, O Muhammad, endure them with beautiful patience and leave them to me. Let them be, for we have shackles that will bind them, fire that will consume them, food that will choke them, and painful torment in a day of dread. Then unfolds a vivid scene of that dreadful day. Here is an image of terror that surpasses the realm of human beings and extends to the very earth in its grandest forms. The earth will quake, tremble and shatter, and the mountains, once immovable, will crumble and collapse. If this is the fate of the earth and mountains, how then will frail and feeble mankind fare? In the midst of this terrifying scene, the discourse turns to the deniers, the wealthy and privileged, and reminds them of Pharaoh the tyrant and how God seized him with overwhelming might. With such brevity, this reminder shakes their hearts to the core, especially after the vision of the quaking earth and collapsing mountains. That was the punishment of the hereafter, and this is the punishment of the world. So how will you save yourselves from this overwhelming terror? The terror is so immense that even the heavens will be torn apart, and before that, the earth and the mountains will tremble. It is a horror that would turn the hair of innocent children grey. Such is the dreadful scene, reflected both in the silent cosmos and in the living human soul, that the Qur'an paints before its audience as though it were unfolding before them. And it confirms this vision with the utmost certainty. It is a promise that will undoubtedly come to pass. Whatever he wills is done, and whatever he decrees is realized. In the face of this all-encompassing terror, manifest in the universe and in the human soul, he reaches out to their hearts, urging them to remember and choose the path of safety, the path of God. And truly the path to God is more secure, more peaceful, and easier than the uncertain and perilous way that leads to this dreadful horror. While these verses shake the very foundations of the deniers, they descend upon the heart of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the small, vulnerable band of believers with solace, confidence and certainty. For they know that their sustainer is with them, that he will destroy their enemies and deal with them severely. It is but a short respite for a term known only to him, after which the matter will be settled. When the appointed time comes, God will seize their enemies with chains, fire, and painful torment. Surely God does not abandon his friends to their enemies, even if he grants the enemies a temporary respite. Now the second part of the surah comes, revealed about a year after its opening verses, according to the most reliable reports. It is a gentle touch of mercy, wiping away the fatigue, strain, and hardship. A divine call for ease extended to the Prophet and the believers. For God knows their sincerity and devotion to him. Their feet had become swollen from long hours of prayer, reciting large portions of the Qur'an. But God never intended to burden his Prophet or to make him suffer through the Qur'an and the long vigils. Rather, he intended to prepare him for the great mission that still lay ahead for the rest of his life, and for the small group of believers who stood with him. In these words, there is tenderness and reassurance. Your sustainer knows that you stand in prayer for nearly 2/3 of the night, or half of it, or a third, along with a group of those who are with you. Indeed, he has seen you. Your standing, your prayers, yours and those of the small group who stand with you, are known to God and accepted in his balance. Your sustainer knows that you and they have turned away from your beds, leaving the warmth of your resting places on cold, bitter nights. You did not heed the seductive call of your pillows, but instead listened to the call of your sustainer. And now, your sustainer turns to you in mercy, wishing to lighten your load and the load of your companions. He is the one who measures out the night and day, stretching one while shortening the other. Thus, the night lengthens and shortens, yet still you and those with you continue standing in prayer for two-thirds or half or a third of the night. And he knows your weakness, your inability to continue with such constancy. He does not wish to burden you, nor to make things hard for you. Rather, he wishes to provide you with nourishment for your journey. And now you have taken that sustenance. So ease the burden on yourselves and approach this matter with tranquility. For in God's knowledge there lie events awaiting you, tasks that will demand your full strength and energy, making it harder to maintain these long vigils, for whom such night prayers will become a burden, working hard to earn their livelihoods, a necessity of life that cannot be neglected. And God does not want you to abandon the matters of your worldly life and devote yourselves exclusively to acts of worship as monks do. For God knows that the time will come when he permits you to defend yourselves against oppression with the sword, raising the banner of Islam in the land to stand against tyrants. Therefore, ease the load upon yourselves, recite what is easy of the Qur'an without hardship or exertion, uphold the obligatory pillars of faith, and beyond that will remain with you its goodness ever preserved. And turn to God seeking his forgiveness for your shortcomings, for man is ever prone to error and imperfection, no matter how earnestly he strives. It is a touch of mercy, of tenderness and ease that comes after a year of being called to night vigils. And indeed God lightened the burden upon the Muslims, making night prayer a voluntary act, not an obligation. As for the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, he continued on his path with his sustainer, never reducing his night vigil to less than a third of the night, communing with his sustainer in the solitude and stillness of the night. From this sacred presence he drew the strength needed for life and for struggle. For though his eyes may have slept, his heart never did. His heart, peace be upon him, was always occupied with the remembrance of God, wholly devoted to his master. His heart was emptied of everything except his sustainer, despite the heavy burden he carried on his shoulders and the immense hardships he endured.